All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Ozzie. I am with Active Senior Concepts, and I am your current Georgia chapter president. So I'd like to welcome everybody this morning for our May chapter meeting. We have a couple special guests, which we'll get to in a minute. But we just came back from the mid-year national meetings where we had several new designees. We actually had a few pass the class this year. So like we do every year, 100%. So if you are a new designee, would you please rise? I know we have one, two, excellent. I think we had 9 that passed the exam. And then Tom, if you would please come forward. Tom Crumpton also passed, and he was not able to be at the pinning ceremony. So all of you that weren't there, you'll get to see a little bit of what happens. Now we're all members, right? So, because this is a very secret thing. Nobody can outside this room can know this. Well, we'll have to do that later. So I guess the others still are recovering from the initiation, which we'll get to a little bit later after the meeting. So come over this way. All right.
It's hard standing on 2.
All right. Does anybody have a 12C, to do the oath of office? All right, let me get this out of here. Gag bag here. Okay, there we go. There we go. So Tom, I'll let you congratulate you on Okay, thank you. Excellent, excellent. We also have, let me go through this. I'd like to thank sponsors, Marcus and Millichat, Ackerman and Company, The Simpson Company, and Kitchens Kelly Gaines. We also have our silver sponsors listed, I think right in front of me as well. Another thing, at our national meeting, our chapter once again received an award. And we were once again awarded a Chapter of Excellence Award. So congratulations to us. It's a very good thing. Let's see where we're going to put that. Anyway, we'll hold that. In addition, we're in Region 9, which is Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and part of Tennessee. And President's Cup awards this year, Alabama won President's Cup for Tier 3, and South Carolina Chapter 1 President's Cup for Tier 2. So region really well represented. So that is a very good meeting. I encourage everyone to go if you have a chance to the national meetings. Next one is this fall. It'll be in Los Angeles. So make your plans accordingly if you can. All right, next we have a special guest. Steve Morera is here. He is the National First Vice President for the Institute. He will be our Institute President in 2016. And I wanted Steve to come up and just give us an update on the National Institute and what's going on there. So please welcome Steve Morera.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Okay, so about 5 years ago, Frank Simpson, I think was Frank Simpson, you know Frank Simpson, past national president, chapter president. Jay Levine graduated in 2003 with me. About 5, 6 years ago, I had come to Atlanta to do some business. I get a call from Frank, and he says, when are you going to get here? I says, I'll probably get here about 4. He says, I'd like to pick you up. He says, and then I'm going to take you down to Hal's for dinner in Buckhead, and we got to have a conversation. And Frank did, and he told me that he was going to run for national president, and I told him we were J. Levine graduates of Florida, and I were happy to support him. So I get here this year as first vice president. Yesterday, I got left at the airport, but Katie took care of that. She come pick me up, call Frank for dinner. He says, I got a soccer game. That's cool. I know both his kids. Couldn't make that. And then I got here this morning, and Paul told me to be here at 8 o'clock. I got here at 8:02, and Frank says, you're late, boy. So that's how we started. But why this is a great chapter and you win is because of the work that gets done at National. And Frank did a lot of great things. You're having a 102 class here. And you got two of the two best instructors in the country for 102. And I know Frank is still involved and he still coordinates things like that. So thank you to Frank and all your sponsors and the volunteers, because that's what our organization is all about, is volunteers. We work really hard all the time at the Institute, and the volunteers work hard locally. We concentrate on something that we started actually our first class called NET, Networking, Education, and Technology. And we're still working really hard on networking, education, and technology at the Institute this year, and we will continue to do so every year. One of the blessings of good management is it's finally now in 2014, after about 5 years of getting hammered, things are turning around budget-wise. And that took a lot of work from past leadership. We had amazing cuts. Our budget went from 18 million nationally down to 10 million. And we're rising up again. And where we're concentrating right now in the networking, education, and technology is we'll start with education. We're working on something called blended learning. We're putting $400,000 towards that for a 101 class, and you'll only be going in for 1 or 2 days instead of the full week. And the rest of it will be online. We've already cut 40 segments, and we were watching that last week at the meeting, and I believe it's the future for part of it. But the interesting thing last night in talking to the 102 instructors, and when I travel around, I ask every instructor, I ask everybody what you think, and then I try to deliver everybody's message, because sometimes it's hard to get heard at the board of directors. The belief from those instructors, and I kind of concur with it, is that while blended learning is the future, a lot of folks love that classroom experience. And you really get a lot out of the networking when you sit with real-world instructors. So we're going to do this combination. That is the future, the online education. My kids are doing it in 9th grade down in Florida. They have a class online in high school, and it's blended learning. It's definitely going to be a wonderful thing. Technology-wise, you will hear it. It's in process now, but the board has voted on it so we can start talking about it. We're going to be hooked up with Xceligent. They're going to compete with CoStar and LoopNet pretty hard. Your technology is going to improve hugely. And we feel finally financially we're going to be able to get control of our budget better that way, because we can fix the costs. And I could tell you comfortably in that contract already, you won't see any increases in technology in your dues for at least 3 years right now fixed, which is a good thing, because those numbers really get worked on in technology world. It's tough to maintain low-cost technology and the integrity of STDB and CCIM tech and keep it within budget. The last thing, and I reversed this, is the networking, and that's something that I've come to love. My income through CCIM, and I've been through 3 recessions, I'm doing this 38 years, has been blessed so many times in working this network. So we've added something called Globe Street. How many of you are on Globe Street now? I suggest if you're not, you get online, you look up globestreet.com, you register, you will see designation promotion like you've never seen before in CCIM. We are hammering designation promotion. And we also do trade shows now. We set a booth up. One of the things, I don't know how well it plays in Atlanta. I'm in Orlando, Florida, but I'm from the Northeast, obviously, can't pronounce, still don't say y'all as well as yous guys, but at the end of the day, I travel in New York, LA, everywhere. And the one question I've always disliked strongly since 1997 as I worked on this designation is, what is a CCIM? Oh, I love that question coming to New York and LA, and like they never heard of us when there's close to 15,000 members. And we do several hundred billions in transactions every year. So we are pushing through the institutions now. We are pushing through Globe Street, or we are pushing through Forum. And we had an event here we were trying to do from IMN because there's a distressed debt wave still around the country, a product that still has to be sold over 4 or 5 years. So what you'll see coming in your budget in the Atlanta show next year, which is in the fall, our national show is here. Don't recall what hotel yet, but we'll be getting it out. We will be doing that in conjunction with Globe Street Forum. And if you've ever been to a national show, once the students leave and you have the volunteers left, it's really not that crowded. I would tell you that at our show this year, first in LA, coming up, because we are doing that with them, but we're actually doing an Atlanta show, which means we will have institutional players from every major discipline, mortgage bankers, net lease, whatever sponsors that we can get that are playing hard in Atlanta, and they'll participate in the 2-day, basically, networking conference that we're going to have along with education. I would think we'll have 700 or 800 people, I hope at least. So look for that. Everything is good at the Institute. The Institute's getting stronger, and it's really great to be here in Atlanta. Thank you for the hospitality. Do you want me to do any questions?
Yeah, sure.
Does anybody have any questions about the Institute? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. That was, it's a real pleasure and honor to have you here with us today. So, again, thank you for being here. Another couple quick announcements. As he mentioned, our 102 class is going on right now. We have 38 people signed up for the class that are there. So great attendance, very good class. Our next class will be 101. That'll be in August, August 25th. So I guess not many people in this room would need that, but you can do it, education after the pen, by the way, and take it for CE credit. Our next chapter meeting will be June 12th, and that is on retail, the next big thing. I've seen some of the highlights of that. I think that's going to be a really good program, so please make sure you're here for that. And then our next social engagement will be June 18th. Will be our Braves outing with the Alabama chapter. Darren has set that up. It's going to be at the 755 Club. It's going to be a great event. And the guys from Alabama, I spoke with a bunch of them. They're really looking forward to it. They come over every year in a bus and have a pretty good time. Nancy and I actually talked about maybe we're going to take a bus over there to ride the bus back with them because it's so much fun. But anyway, so put that on your calendar as well. All right, now to our program for today on governmental affairs. We've got two great speakers with us today. We've got John BARBOUR, who is the Director of Governmental Affairs for the Georgia Association of Realtors. He's going to be speaking on different legislative things that have come up and more of a state focus. And then James TOUCHTON is Manager of Policy and Governmental Affairs for the Council for Quality Growth. I think most of us know of the council. He's going to be talking about local issues, policy issues, zoning, that sort of stuff. So I'm not going to do a whole bunch on their bios. I'll let them really introduce themselves and talk about their history. They both come from the state Senate, have worked in our Capitol Hill, I guess, here locally for several years. So they're very grounded in local politics and state politics. So guys, if you would, we'll start with you, John. If y'all would each give, or if you guys would each give a brief introduction and tell us about yourself and some of your history and maybe a big win or two that you guys have helped policy-wise here recently.
Sure. Hey, good morning, everyone. John BARBOUR, Director of Governmental Affairs for the Georgia Association of Realtors, which I tell people is just a fancy term to say I'm one of the realtor lobbyists down at the state capitol. I know that term, gets kicked around in a negative connotation, but some of the things I think we'll talk about today will really highlight the value of representation. Because there's an old adage down at the Capitol, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I can guarantee you that's true. If there's an issue we're working on and that one subsect of that issue does not have representation, they're going to get chewed up and spit out every time. I've been working for the Realtor Association for about 6 years now. I love working for the realtors, property owners with property rights, near and dear to my heart. I go to sleep, every night, I sleep great. You lobby down at the Capitol, it's like an attorney. Attorneys get a bad rap, lobbyists get a bad rap, but, working for real estate and property rights is just something that I really value. And I think you guys, if you don't know what your lobbyists do, it's something that you need to get more involved in because it's really the backbone of your business. As Paul pointed out, I started my career with the state Senate, worked for the Senate for 4 years, or actually 5 sessions. I started interning for the Senate. So I've actually been, despite my youthful appearance, been at the Capitol for 11 years now. So I've got a little bit of experience, although my boss has been down there for 28 years. So combined, we from the Realtor Association bring over 35 years of lobbying experience, and that's extremely valuable. A few quick victories that we had last legislative session, and I think we have to look at what last session was to understand, the sort of a magnitude of a victory. Last session was intended to be a do-nothing session. We're an election year. We're going to be voting here just in a few days. But with the governor, lieutenant governor, all the statewide folks, all the legislatures up for election. So they don't want to pass anything that's going to be controversial or hurt them in a primary election. So there's a real concerted effort, and the most in the 10 years I've been down there, to slow the process down. Not to mention, since the primary had been moved up from July to May 20th, there was a real effort to get out fast because those guys can't raise money while the legislature's in session. And politics is about two things. It's about money and people. And believe me, they were ready to get done and get out and start raising some money to hit the campaign trail. So a few things that we worked on that I think will be of some value to you guys. There was a bill that, I think unintended consequences of legislation is the real value of having a lobbyist down at the Capitol on your behalf. There was a bill brought forth by the Auctioneers Association, which seemed to be completely innocuous, and they believed it was. But what they were trying to do is that they were trying to update the auctioneers' licensing code. We all have our license law, real estate license law, something that we work on every single year. Well, they don't have a professional lobbyist. But what they do have is the president of their association, his mother is a legislator and a good friend of ours. So as the president of the association, this seemed like the perfect opportunity to modify the state law and update their code. But one of the things they wanted to do was define what an auction is. Auction is not defined under the Georgia Code. What is defined is to say that if you have an auction business, then you must be a licensed auctioneer. So they wanted to define what an auction is, and this is where the rubber hits the road with legislation. It's the literal word on the paper that becomes law. So to define an auction, they were to say that if you were to sell property, merchandise, or real property via any means, including in person or the internet, via competitive bid, sealed bid, or silent bid, then you must be a licensed auctioneer. Now, just by a show of hands, anyone ever taken the highest and best offer on a property? Well, under that definition, you're an auctioneer. And unless you have an auctioneer's license, you're in violation of the state law. So we caught this really early on, but the bill was dropped very late in the process. So we caught it the first day, which it only had 2 more days to pass or it was dead. So there was a real push to get this thing through. And we talked to the author about it, and she said, well, I don't see why you guys are concerned. This is just dealing with auctioneers. And we said, well, yes, ma'am, but you understand when you define what an auction is, you draw in every single real estate licensee in the state of Georgia. And if you look at the Real Estate Brokerage Act, if you have a real estate license, you are legally allowed to auction property or auction real property in Georgia. And that's been in law since the 80s. And we intend to keep that. We don't intend to give away the rights that we've held with a real estate license for almost 30 years. But she still just didn't understand why we were concerned. And this is some of the issues you deal with down at the Capitol. She thinks that she's just dealing with a very narrow sect. This just deals with auctioneers, only if you're auctioning property. And we said, yes, ma'am, we understand that's what you think. But I'm here to tell you, when you do this, you're going to impact not only just real estate licensees, any entity, the Sheriff's Association, your local governments, anyone that auctions surplus property. All of these folks were being drawn in by 2 words in her legislation. So we engaged with the House Regulated Industries Committee, which typically all license law bills go through. And I don't know if anyone is here from the Paulding County, Dallas, Georgia area, but the chairman of that committee, his name is Howard Maxwell, a very good champion of the Realtors. He looked at us and said, guys, that's not happening. And it's tough to challenge a legislator, particularly when it's her son. When her son comes to testify in committee and you have to testify against her son, that puts you in a very awkward position. But we were there, we worked the chairman, we worked the committee ahead of time, and we were able to draw attention to the fact that she was about to have a very negative consequence onto each and every one of you and your typical business practice. And with a minor fight, we were able to strip that language out and put a carve-out into that bill for real estate licensees. essentially to say that nothing in this bill would infringe upon a real estate license law. That's the version that passed the House. When it got to the Senate, that's when our friends with the local governments and the sheriffs, et cetera, all got involved, and the definition of auction was then stripped out completely because at that point she realized that we were alerting her that she was stirring the hornet's nest, which she did. The reason why I bring that to your attention, one, is because if we're not there to catch these 2 or 3 words in a bill that's going to really have an impact on your business, next year you're going to be caught in a gotcha situation because what the legislators think they're doing, they think they're doing something good for their colleague. She's a member of the House. Her son's a member of the Auctioneers Association. Let's help her out. That's a lot of that goes on at the Capitol. When they're trying to help, that can really end up hurting you. So we're proud to be there to make sure that didn't happen. But what she's telling us is that she wants to sit down and talk over the summer. Now, when you have a victory and then your opponent says, I want to continue to talk about it, that means they're not happy. So we're happy to have that conversation. Anytime a legislator says they want to sit down and have and talk about something, you say, yes, ma'am, I'm happy to do that. But if they want to infringe upon the real estate license law and try to take away the right for a real estate licensee to auction property or to define auction so broadly to draw you guys in, we'll be there and we'll be very clear with her that that's a conversation stopper right there. We're not going down that road. That's just an example of just a totally innocuous bill that pops up and disappears. So that bill ended up passing, but you never hear about it because the version that passed does not impact you. So the portion of the bill that was critical was done a long time ago in committee. So sometimes it's the bills that you don't read about in the newspaper, that really can have a serious impact on your business. Another one that we worked on this year that I think you'll be hearing more and more about, that actually has gotten some media attention, is dealing with solar panels. And I know you guys dealing with commercial properties, you guys have some property that's ripe for the inclusion of solar panels, and that's where the market's going. It's inevitable that we'll be seeing more of that. But the real battle is between the solar panel companies and the power companies. We have it's a regulated monopoly. It's called the Territorial Act. The state's broken down into territories between Georgia Power, the EMCs, and MEAG, which is your Municipal Electric Associations. And they're the only ones that can provide power in the state of Georgia. Now, the solar companies are running into severe interference from the power companies because when you install the panel on the roof, what they would like to do is to be able to sell the power back to the grid. You've got the power, you don't utilize all the power you may generate from your building. They want to sell it back to the grid. Sounds like a great opportunity, not only to lower the power bill from a commercial building, but to also generate an income stream. Well, the power companies are not going to allow that. And at the third floor of the Capitol, where all the lobbyists hang out, and I either compare it to a schoolyard or a prison yard, because there's hundreds of lobbyists, and we're all looking at each other. And there's like little cliques. You've got your real estate clique over here, your bankers, your do-gooders over there. You know who all's hanging out where. And then the Georgia Power guys, there's about 4 or 5 of them, and they're just leaning against the wall. They carry a big stick, and they don't have to get off the wall that often. But when they do, you better believe they're about to swing that big stick. And this is one of the issues when they get off the wall. They're just really passionate about it. But I think they're in a tough spot. I think the market is moving in the direction where they're going to have to acquiesce to some degree. And I think what the solar guys are trying to do is to move away from the ability to sell the power back to the grid. And what they're trying to do is to say that a solar panel company can finance the panels on the building. Because right now, under the law, they can't even do that. You can purchase solar panels if you have the capital to do so, and you can put them on your building. But it's expensive. It's a big capital outlay. So what they're trying to do is to say you can finance the panels through the solar panel company, making the cost cheaper. But what's going to happen is those solar companies are then also going to be considered a power company under the letter of the law, because that power does go back to the grid when it's not being used. So the power companies are really putting up a fight against that. And where the Realtor Association got involved was not dealing with the Territorial Act. That's going to be what you're going to hear about in the newspaper. And that's going to be the threshold that has to be crossed in order for you guys to see a greater opportunity for solar on your buildings. But where we got involved last year was there was just another 2 lines in the bill, just a short provision. What they're trying to do is they're trying to circle around to say we're not trying to impact the Territorial Act. All we're trying to do is to say we want greater access to solar panels. So what they wrote in the law was to say that any owner or occupant would have the right to install panels on the building. Now, I'm no legal scholar, but usually in rooms like this, in some sort of ballroom, you see on the wall maximum occupancy. Now, I don't know what the legal definition of an occupant is, but I don't think it's good public policy to say that an occupant of a building would have the right to install a solar panel. Now, it's probably not going to happen where some random occupant in the building comes in and says, I want to put $30,000 worth of solar panels on the building. I think what they're really getting at is a tenant. You may have a strip center, and you could have a large tenant like a Walmart. They want to come in and say, we want to put solar panels in. This is going to be a great opportunity for us. We don't want to come up with the $100,000 up front, but if we can lease them at a good rate from the solar company for 15, 20 years, then that's going to be a workable business solution. Well, you guys know that sometimes you lease on the building with a tenant maybe 5 or 7 years. And the lease for those solar panels may be 15 or 20 years. So what happens when your tenant leaves and they've made an improvement on your building without you as the owner of the building having the right to say yes or no? If they give an occupant or a tenant under the law the ability to install and finance the panels, that puts the owner of the property in a very tenuous position. One of the ironies is they used private property rights in the title of the bill. They're trying to say that because you can't finance a solar panel, your property rights are being infringed upon. And at the same time, they're saying that the occupant or tenant of a building would have the right to install the panel, and that would supersede, that would be state law, that would supersede your contract. They would say, the letter of the law would say you have that right.
Wow.
Yeah, so this was 2 words in the bill when they said or occupant instead of just owner. When it said owner or occupant, that is a massive degradation of private property rights. So we bring it to the author's attention. He looks at it and says, I don't read it that way. Everyone says this guy's one of the smartest guys in the General Assembly. We'll say, well, sir, I don't understand how you can't read it that way when it says or occupant, owner or occupant has the right to install. That's what it says. It's one of the most clear-cut sentences in a bill that I've ever read in my 10 years at the Capitol. So we go through the process. We work the author, work the committee, talk to the speaker, and eventually it comes to where the power companies are loving the fact that the realtors are engaging on this issue because we're slowing everything down, which is not our intent. We're just trying to get this one portion addressed to make sure that the property rights of an owner of a building are not infringed upon, to try to circumvent what the Territorial Act, which is the real issue. At the end of the day, we were able to get that language removed, and we're actually able to insert language in the bill that said that nothing under this code section would infringe upon property rights, zoning, etc. So again, just another critical example of why it's important to have representation at the Capitol and how 2 words, 1 or 2 words, can change everything. So that's been removed, but that is an issue that will come back next session. And I think our issue is going to be addressed. I think we were very clear that we were not going to back down from our position with the private property rights portion. But the issue between the solar companies and the power companies is going to continue for a couple of years. And if I had to crystal ball it, I think you're going to see the solar companies gaining some ground, and I think you'll see greater access to solar financing and commercial properties.
Good deal. John, thank you very much. You know, most of us here are realtors as well, and so, you know, that's one of the things that both NAR and JAR and our local association through our own RPAC, the Atlanta Regional Political Action Committee, they do make a difference because, you know, we're sitting here running cash flows and calculating IRR. We're not going through that mind-numbing detail of 2 words in a bill. So thank you guys for what you do, and both of those are just really good examples of protecting our rights, which is what you're supposed to be doing. So thank you. James?
How do I follow that up right there? So, you know, John's biggest opposition is dealing with educators, I mean, with the legislators who are educated beyond their intelligence, and my biggest one is dealing with homeowners who are educated beyond their intelligence. So my background is,
I like that.
despite my age, look, I only have 10 years in this arena. I spent some time in the governor's office and House of Representatives, and then 5 years in the state Senate, and 2.5 years ago, I finally decided that I wanted to, you know, do some real work at the local level, where the real legislation gets done. And I went to the Council for Quality Growth, and he said, most of y'all know the council, but for those of you who don't, we are a 30-year-old trade association that deals with the regulatory side of economic development. So I work in all 70 cities and all 10 counties around the region on the regulatory side of the issue. So planning and zoning, permitting, the things that, you know, people, when I tell my friends what I do, they just stare at me because they have no idea what I just talked about. But a lot of our issues that we do work with, and you know, I think a lot of y'all are finding across the region, is we're starting to see a lot of local governments come back. We're seeing issues just like here in Dunwoody. I don't know if you all follow Dunwoody a lot, but you remember Dunwoody became a city in 2008, so all of a sudden you've got a city council and a mayor they had 1 rezoning last year in Dunwoody. And so you got a city council and mayor in this city alone who's never dealt with any kind of real zoning or real permitting issues since they became elected. So he has some then big wins. So I think one of our wins right now, and it affects your industry more so than I think anything else, is Dunwoody wants to limit the number of multi-family, multi-use here in the city, which includes a little commercial in there, by saying that anything over 3 stories has to be steel and concrete frame built. It can't be stick built above 3 stories, which, you know, when you start thinking about the potential cost of that when you're looking to do a redevelopment in a building, it's pretty intense right there. So we've been we've been working with the city for about 4 months now to try to limit that. And I can tell you, as of yesterday, 2 of my biggest members pulled a $30 million project from the city and said, we're done. We're not dealing with this anymore. We don't want to deal with these kind of issues, you know, in Dunwoody. We'll take our business elsewhere. We're welcome. I say all that because we've been dealing with a lot of these in the weeds issues. Like, you know, I was going with talking to him, I was thinking about earlier. One of our biggest things we deal with is permit reform. I don't know how many of y'all actually are in depth with the permitting side of the development, but one of the biggest wins I considered last year was taking the entire DeKalb County Commission and staff at CEO's office to Cherokee County. I don't know how many of y'all do business in Cherokee, probably not much, but Cherokee County has a model for how they do permit reform, cross-training, you know, simple turnaround. In 3 days, your plans are reviewed, everyone's submitted, inspections are done. So we took DeKalb up there, and I think it's the first time most of those people have ever seen Cherokee County. But for them to see up there, I mean, really, they were like, we've never been up here before. And so one of the neat things, we did a half-day session with them and said, look, while we know it's a different beast, DeKalb has a problem. You're losing, I mean, just on the commercial side, you know, one of my biggest members, Seelig, stopped in DeKalb because they said, well, you know, we can't get anything done there. So in a half-day session, we were able to kind of show them, here's how it can be done. While it's size-wise differently, DeKalb came back and said, yeah, let's start this. And within a month, they hired Luz Barrero, City of Atlanta. They hired a consultant. So they took DeKalb. Everything was very discombobulated. The 3rd, 5th floors for your permit, where you had to submit your plans. Who was doing it now? Everything's on a 1 floor. They're starting to cross-train out DeKalb. And why I say the process is starting to move, the ship is being turned. It's a big ship to turn in DeKalb, but it's actually starting to turn. We have 10 of our members sitting on a stakeholders committee and working with Lee out there, the CEO, to really say, okay, look, he's going to the industry. If you folks that are writing the checks, you know, your employees here are great, but they're not the ones that are writing the checks, and they don't understand the implications when they are holding up someone's plans, the real cost value. And we found across the region with DeKalb, City of Atlanta, you know, even some of our suburban counties, that the folks in these offices don't understand what y'all are dealing with, the day-to-day cost. You hold it up a week, you hold it up 30 days, here's my bottom line. You're now really affecting my bottom line, and believe it or not, we're not all millionaires in this industry, and not every deal is $1 million deal, so we're not walking away with huge profits. And one more win I could talk about, I thought was interesting. We were able to bring 60 planning directors around the region to the council office for a half-day session, and brought in 3 of our members, and we were able to sit there and talk with these planning directors and say, look, what's y'all's biggest problems with the industry? Here's some of our biggest problems. And we had an actual 4.5-hour discussion with every small town, every county to say, where can we work together? What are some of your biggest complaints about the industry? And we would have some of our residential and commercial and industrial members show them in real detail. Here's a plan that I had. Here's a project that I had. Here are some of the issues I faced. And here's what it cost me every day that I was delayed. Here's what it cost me when I'm financing these bonds, and I've got a company, I've got a company that wants to come in like Carter's, and they're waiting for this building. Well, they're on a deadline. I don't hit that deadline, I've got to pay rent for the next 3 months because they're going to wait till the next time around to move into the building. Things that these folks don't think about. So we're trying to educate a lot of these legislators on, and a lot of this staff on, here's the real issue. So I really deal a lot with behind the scenes. Rarely will you see what I do ever in a paper as far as, we try to work very quietly. We don't get in there, we don't fight with the city council, we don't fight with the commissioners council. We work very quietly behind the scenes to say, where can we come to consensus? I don't know how many of y'all are familiar with Atlanta had their stormwater ordinance. I don't know if y'all saw that over the last year. When they first came to us and said, we're gonna present this ordinance, I looked at them and said, well, your goal is to improve the water infrastructure here and improve the water quality in Atlanta with all the issues we have. You're reaching way too far. You're going to make it where, again, you see Lake, who owns all of Marietta Boulevard for the most part for their commercial property out there, industrial, they're going to sit there and pay property taxes on their building and do nothing when it comes to redeveloping or repaving because of how far you're overreaching. So we spent a year working with the watershed department on their plan. I mean, I learned more about stormwater than I've ever wanted with the 1-inch runoff. But my point with that was we were able to work with them for over a year to get to a better ordinance and to help them understand, why you're well-intentioned, you're hurting the economic development at the end of the day because no one's going to redevelop. You're making it more expensive for us to redevelop, more expensive for us to come in here and do what your elected officials want, what your economic development folks are saying. So after a year, we were able to work with them. I don't know if any of y'all dealt with stormwater, seen this green building ordinance, but we were able to get some incentives put in there for if you redevelop, if you have a commercial building, if you have a multi-use building. And so I think it's a big win for us. It's really working on these little issues that people don't think about, or the little ones that the public doesn't realize are out there, but that really affects the bottom line for a lot of our members, a lot of folks in your industry. So that's my 3. But I've got a lot more to talk about. I mean, tree ordinances, but I'm going to let Paul ask some questions here.
Thanks, James. I was several years ago when Robert Broom was with the commercial board. He was our lobbyist, and I remember the stormwater ordinance, not stormwater, the green building ordinance came up in the city of Atlanta. And just to give an example how politics locally especially have changed here a little bit in Atlanta, the city came out and said, this is what we're doing. And the local board, we fought it. We formed a coalition at that point called MARTAG. So all the local area real estate trade associations grouped together. The council really started getting its strength at that point as well. And that bill was defeated. But what was important is over the years what has started happening, and Scott does a great job as well. Scott Seelig, one of our past presidents, also governmental affairs director or chairman at the board. But what's starting to happen now is the local governments are reaching out to us first and saying, here's what we're thinking of doing, what do you think? And that's a huge step because what it does, it saves so much time and effort and heartache. Instead of fighting it once it's announced, we can work on it together. And that also tells you how strong the real estate industry is and how much they love it and also can fear it, because it's not just RPAC and money and that sort of thing, but there's a lot of us and we have a lot of votes. And so so thanks obviously for what you guys do there. And that's just an example of how it is starting to work and is working. John, tell me about, can you update us at all from a GAR and legislative impact about the port? Have you guys been involved in that at all? Briefly, just kind of an update there from a legislative standpoint.
Yeah, from a legislative standpoint, the the update on the port is all about money. You guys may have heard, and I'm sure that all of you know, how critical the expansion or the deepening of the Savannah port is from an economic development perspective. Not only for Atlanta, but for the state of Georgia and even the southeast region. And this is just an absolutely critical must-do scenario. What we're trying to do is to deepen the port by only 5 feet. It's going from 42 to 47 feet, so we can accommodate the supermax ships that are coming through the Panama Canal. And if we don't, then they're going to go somewhere else, because this is where the future of the industry is. But it's all about money. And this, and politics and money, hand in hand. What happened recently, just back in March, everyone was singing Kumbaya between the feds and the state for quite some time. Vice President Biden was down. He, I think, visited the Port of Savannah twice. Everyone holding hands and talking about how critical this project was. And then all of a sudden in March, when Congress finally passes a budget, since James and I were in high school, finally they pass a budget, but the funding for the port was not there, as it was sort of promised that it would be. So that's leaving a lot of questions on the viability of the project, because Georgia's, this year in our budget, we put up $35 million, which, in these economic times is a large chunk. It's hard to get $35 million in any portion of the budget. But Georgia's doing its part. Georgia has now reached our commitment. We've put up $266 million, which was the deal reached with the feds, and that they would pick up the rest of the tab. So we're paid up. So your governor, your lieutenant governor, your General Assembly has lived up to their end of the bargain. They made sure that Georgia has put the money up that was part of the deal. So now what we're waiting on is we're waiting for the feds. And there's a little bit of a blame game or speculation on why that money disappeared. I certainly am not in a position to tell you why it did. Senator Isaacson spoke at the Atlanta Board of Realtors to both the residential and commercial folks a couple weeks back. He touched on the issue, and if I don't want to use his words, but I think he was optimistic. So if I had to crystal ball it, I think the politics runs its course sometime over the next year or two, and the money shows up. And I think the project gets done. But from a legislative standpoint, all I can really say is that the Georgia General Assembly has done their part to make sure that they have funded completely their obligation. And what that's doing is allowing the project to continue to move forward while the feds drag their feet. They can still do the environmental studies, et cetera, which all can be very, very expensive. So that is still moving forward, thanks to the General Assembly putting those funds forward. But the final completion of the project will be tied to federal funding.
Thank you. So you're telling us that there was a broken promise coming out of Washington. Shocking.
It's hard to believe.
Shocking.
First time I've heard that.
Excellent. Thank you. James, are there any existing or proposed moratoriums that you know of as far as zoning or building, either real or effective, that are going on that might be impacting some stuff that we're doing in Metro Atlanta?
I think the moratoriums you're looking at to see are more aimed at apartments. And then small cities, again, Milton just put a moratorium. I mean, I don't know how far out y'all go over Milton, but they put a moratorium on single-family rezonings because they've been getting so many applications. And again, these governments that don't know how to handle and the community who's against it. So Milton is looking at single-family. It's mostly residential that I'm getting. These are on the apartment side. On the commercial side, no, but more residential. The city of Decatur tried. We were able to. They wanted to put because of the infill development, they wanted to put a moratorium on single-family redevelopment there because they felt that the houses were getting too big for the neighborhood. But we were able to sort of remind them, these are your neighbors that are selling these houses. They're still on the same size property, and the infill is still being worked out. So we were able to beat that back, but now it looks like it may be coming back. We're hearing apartment moratoriums in Cobb County because of the stadium and because they're afraid that there's too many aging apartment complexes So we're quietly trying to make sure that that doesn't happen. And luckily, these relationships we have are able to sort of help out with these different planning directors and community development directors and remind them moratoriums aren't always the answer. You know, that's always the easiest thing to do is a moratorium, but you throw the baby out with the bathwater a lot of times when you're doing that. You don't realize, I think, the implications on the other sectors when you do that. So no moratoriums that I'm saying that's really going to affect. I mean, you know.
Yeah, but, you know, there's a lot of people here that sell land, and, you know, and obviously residential development is trying to come back in certain areas. I know Forsyth, East Cobb, a lot of those areas, and now you've got the neighbors that are coming back. They didn't have anything to fuss about the last few years, and now, you know, a lot of inventory's gone, and so, I mean, that is a big deal.
We just dealt with one with Cobb County. I mean, a continued care retirement, community. I don't know if you all have seen it. Kevin Eisen's Living is trying to build this property. You know, we spent 5 years ago, before my time, worked on this ordinance, the first CCRC in Cobb. Well, you know, Kevin comes in there. They propose a 700 bed, you know, out in East Cobb. Well, the residents, you know, rail up, and you have reality as elected officials, as John alluded to, in election years, and a lot of times they don't want to make tough decisions. It makes me wonder why people run for office a lot of times. They don't want to make the decisions, so they effectively put a moratorium by kicking it back to us and saying, well, let's go rework the code, the ordinance. So we spent painful meetings with East Cobb homeowners associations and folks, and the result was we told them 6 years ago, almost 6 years ago, y'all got what you wanted, we got what we want. Now, do you want to do this again? Because we will spend our time fighting again over this. Got it back, you know, we were able to get a no recommendation. Let's leave it as is and let's let the code act. And I think that's part of the problem you're finding in the metro region, especially in areas like Forsyth, in areas that are redeveloping, especially trying to figure out how do we cater to this new multi-use that's really coming in, or these you know, my generation, I say, the 30-year-olds who don't want to buy a house, the 30-year-olds who want to redevelop, who want to be able to live above. I mean, you look at Avalon and Alpharetta, I think that's a huge thing. I mean, you know, look at West Village and Smyrna. You're looking at Jamestown. I think that's where people are shifting towards. You know, and I think a lot of these residential folks have no idea, you know, especially ones that are in your Cobb counties and your Decatur's, how to adjust to that. So that's our biggest challenge, is trying to educate these folks that you can work together on this. You know, if we work together, we can actually come out with a product that's going to be a long-term quality product. But when we spend all this time fighting, you're losing. People don't realize the implication when they lose this business. You know, again, I used Dunwoody, and I told them, you just lost because you're one of the hottest office markets right here. You're one of the biggest markets for people. State Farm just moved in 8,000 new jobs, and now you're trying to block folks like us moving in. Where do you want us to go? Where do you want us to live? You know, and that's what these folks don't realize. Everyone's in their own little silo, and they're not looking at the bigger picture. So that's one of the biggest challenges we find. And so these moratoriums, I always say, are the easiest answer because it's easy and it sounds good and it appeals to the homeowners, but it's something we try to stay away from that's absolutely needed.
Okay, good deal. One more quick question, and then we'll open up for a couple questions as we need to wrap up soon. And this will go out to both of you guys. What is obviously one of our big challenges is regionalism, or the lack thereof. You have all the counties, all the cities, all the different municipalities, which obviously impact our transportation. You know, T-Splost 1 failed miserably, unfortunately. I think for most of us in this room would say, is there a potential T-Splost 2 coming? What are you guys hearing as far as coming up ideas, ways to handle transportation issues here in particular? I don't know if you know this, but I mean, we can go north-south in Atlanta. You can't go east-west. It's miserable. Any ideas there?
I'm just going to jump in real quick. I think James may be more suited to answer the question because they deal more specifically with a lot of our transportation issues. But just from a legislative perspective, I think the wounds are very, very fresh from for lack of a better term, the ass kicking that the T-Splost took. The Realtor Association, just from between the National Association and GAR, we put up $620,000 to advocate for the T-Splost. So groups like ours who ponied up, you know, the Metro Atlanta region, there were tens of millions of dollars spent, and it went down in flames. So, you know, you got to ask yourself, if you're a legislator, you know, what is the appetite? What's the appetite to try that again? I don't think, and I have not heard a strong appetite, you know, for them to go down that road anytime soon. My personal thoughts on it, and don't share this with any legislators and they're being videotaped, is, you know, they sort of passed the buck on to us. they need to make some of these tough decisions themselves. I think they set us up for failure. Some of the folks that voted for the bill passionately advocated, the strongest folks fighting against the T-SPLOS when they voted for the bill. They set the structure up, and then they went and fought against it. So they sort of put us in a very tenuous position. Obviously, the need is there, particularly in the Atlanta metro region. And one thing to think about is it passed in 3 regions across the state. So you have this ongoing regional T-SPLOS in 3 regions. That's going to go for 10 years. There's been legislation dropped to do away with that, which that's been fought, and I know the council's worked against that, and that's been defeated. But the voters have spoken in 3 regions that they want it. So when we talk about the next regional plan, you have to consider that 3 of the regions already have something going. So what you can't. I don't think we'll see something statewide that will encompass all regions, because 3 of them have already gone down that road and chosen that. But what I would like to see, and James can, if you got any insight on what you're hearing, I would like to see the ability for contiguous counties to vote to work together to try to pass something, because I think transportation from a needs perspective is vastly different from area to area, and even in the metro region. I think one of the things that doomed it was you had counties like Cherokee County tied into the heart of the city, and they see that their needs are vastly different. They don't want the same transportation solutions. So to allow contiguous counties, if they want to try to work together to put something on the ballot, I would like to see something like that. I think that there may be some appetite for that, but when you get to the General Assembly, there's always been a battle between Atlanta and the rest of the state. If you're from South Georgia, we're talking about either tax dollars or gas tax or whatever we're talking about from a funding perspective. There's just a severe distrust of Atlanta's going to get all the resources, and you're dealing with. You can make the greatest argument. Hey, have you ever been to Atlanta? Have you been stuck in the traffic? And everyone knows it. Everyone knows it's a problem. But getting something to get the entire General Assembly, your speakers from Blue Ridge in the mountains, and traffic's not a big problem up there. There's just the perspectives are vast, as they should be at the state capitol. So my thoughts are, I don't think we'll see a statewide effort anytime soon, but at the Capitol, you never know.
James, what are you seeing locally?
Well, I'm going to go off 3 levels. So I think one of our biggest wins was 2 years ago. We worked with our congressional delegation. I don't know if you all are familiar, but there's, people always wonder why South Georgia roads were pristine when we had congressional balancing. So all the Metro Atlanta got the same, that congressional district here got the same amount of funds as your South Georgia. And so luckily 2 years ago, we were able to get that changed at the congressional level, where at the federal level, where Metro Atlanta is no longer bound to the same amount of federal dollars that South Georgia and North Georgia are. So that was a big, one of those little things that I don't think most people realize, but that was huge and was holding us up. On the state level, my boss was the vice chair of the T-SPLOS effort, and that was my 2nd month on the job. I came in February, so I had 3 months of T-SPLOS, and wow, that was an experience, to say the least. But it was interesting, when you talk about regionalism, you have the chairman of Cherokee County. I don't know if you all have Buzz Aarons up there, Yale-educated, chairman, who's flat out said, if it were up to me, I'd have MARTA up here in Cherokee County. And when you hear that, it's amazing. You got Cobb County, who's against. You got a Cherokee, and you have Forsyth, who is they're adverse to any sort of traffic solution plan. Every time I look at 400, my heart makes me happy, because I think about all the people that live up there that are against transportation when they're sitting in an hour and a half traffic. It kind of makes me happy, because I'm thinking, y'all are the ones that are against this. This is what you got to pay for and deal with. And I think John's right. I don't think we're not going to see a statewide plan. There's no leadership. And I am on camera, so please don't. But there is no. These guys don't have the leadership. They want to pass the buck to the local folks. But our local folks are only representing their little silo. They don't understand that Metro Atlanta is the future here. They don't understand that with a stadium going to Cobb County, with this Georgia Stadium, we need to be connected. With the number of folks that are moving this tech village, moving up to Alpharetta, you're getting this whole tech hub. Where are these kids moving to? They don't want to live in Alpharetta in a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house. They want to live where they can walk places. They want to live in a walkable area. I have folks like the mayor of Alpharetta who tell me, well, we don't want to be the place where they want to, we want a place that people your age aspire to get to, not that they can come to now. And one of their big thing, is rail. They don't want rail. They don't want the easy access up there. So one thing we're working with is Cobb County on this bus rapid transit. I don't know if how many of y'all are familiar with this BRT coming from Ackworth to the Midtown Arts Center. We got the local Tea Party groups and local anti-tax folks say, well, we don't want any county money to go. They don't want county money going to this. We worked on a bill, one of our state bills we worked on a SPLOST bill. Every time you get a SPLOST, for me that lives in Cobb, we passed our last SPLOST by 56 votes. We lose our SPLOST, any transportation is out the door, goodbye. So we worked on a bill trying to split the SPLOST. So you could offer a half penny. So you go to the voters and say, we don't need a full penny, we'll just need a half penny to be able to continue to get these SPLOST passed. We were met with huge resistance, not only from our South Georgia counties, but some of our folks in Paulding. They don't. The elected officials flat out told us they don't want to have that pressure put on them that they can only offer a half penny. They don't want that pressure from the voters, that they're afraid that that's going to limit what they can do. But if we kept trying to educate them, saying, what do you expect to happen? They're going to stop. They're going to stop approving these SPLOST, and then we're going to be up a real creek, I say. I really do. We're on a education funding, education, goodness gracious, a transportation funding study committee that's coming up. That's going to be delayed until after the primary, until summer. That we're going to be sitting down. It's going to look at every tool in the toolbox for transportation. That, from what I understand, this is the first time this committee is going to put something forward that's going to say, here's the deal. One of the deals of the committee was, we don't want the committee unless it's really another committee, just to have it pass, pass something that goes on a shelf and we dust it off every once in a while to remember that we did that. So I think you're going to see in 2015, some real movement at the state level. After the elections, one thing the governor did say very publicly is, after the elections, I really want to start, putting together a real plan again post-SPLOST. But, one thing we do at the local level is really try to educate our folks that when you look at Charlotte, when you look at Austin, when you look at these places that people are coming to, there's a reason that a lot of these younger new generation are moving there, because they have the walkability, they have the transportation. We're very fragmented, as everyone in this room knows. And I think one thing that transportation issues are one of the biggest sellers when it comes to companies moving here, and is when they're relocating. And next to education, transportation is it. So we're really trying to work with these folks and educate and say there are alternatives. We can figure this out. But it's very, I think everyone, you all know, your neighbors in the suburban areas they're not so friendly to the idea of having, being able to move easily. For me, just a personal note, I'm moving from Vinings, Georgia to Buckhead, just so I can have accessibility. It takes me 45 minutes to get here most mornings from Vinings up to Perimeter Center where my office is. Forget that. I want to be able to hop on a train and take it to my office, and I think I think more and more folks are moving that way, which is why you're seeing some of these young single family folks moving to Decatur, moving to even now here in Dunwoody, being able to raise their kids here. So,
Right.
But I will tell you, because I wanted to.
Sure.
Because then I'll get the question on. One thing that we really try to harp on, and I think y'all may see this, is education. The council. One thing we're starting to wade in the waters is, it doesn't matter how much you do, if when these companies are relocating, they want to come buy a place here. If the man's wife doesn't want to raise the kids there, you can move there, but we're not moving there for the kids. So I can only encourage y'all. My biggest encouragement is local level. Look at who's running for some of your education school boards and really take a look at that, because we're finding that is becoming the biggest inhibitor to some of what we want to do and spur development in areas is education. So
Good deal. Thank you. Well, we actually went a couple minutes over, so out of respect for everyone's time, we won't do questions from the floor, but both John and James will hang out for a little while if you guys have individual questions. But if you would help me give them a round of applause, and thank you guys. Really informative, and as my friend Robert Broom said, if you do not take an interest in politics, it will take an interest in you. So get involved. Thanks, you guys, for what you do, and we are adjourned.